today. Me too.
Perfect.
I wrote it last week. I don't have a clue, but let's see what the magic book says. Today's June 2nd. The topic for today's Sunday talk is empowerment. Am I on?
No.
Nope.
Nope.
Keep talking. Keep talking.
Which is a really good thing, because I sometimes sing along. Am I on now?
Yes.
Now.
Yes.
You're
Well, let me start over. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we already did that. Don't squeeze the shaman. At least none of you guys. So the theme for the month is protect the vulnerable. So if today is about empowerment, I will make the logical assumption that that's empowering the vulnerable. And that's the direction I took it. So let's talk about who and what is vulnerable. We have a legal definition. The most important function of any legal system is to protect vulnerable people from serious harm. And I could actually bore you with the details of when laws first came into being. We could do with a few less, perhaps. I just spent the weekend in California, and everything I talked about in class was like, well, you have to check with the California Board of this, and I was like, I love Nevada. So when certain causes arise, the community expects parents or caregivers who are responsible for abuse or neglect need to be brought to justice and punished severely. That's not quite our teaching, but we'll go with that. There was a law reform commission cited in this that talks about resolving proposed changes to the law. Talks about how difficult it is to prosecute people, especially for neglect, because you're trying to prove a negative. You didn't do what you were supposed to do, as opposed to you did do that damage, that harm. So it's tough. And perpetrators can easily avoid sentencing, prosecution, and failure to protect. What about you? Who are you guilty of failing to protect? The first thing that came to my mind for each and every one of us is failure to protect ourselves. We're not talking about legal issues. We're talking about how we judge ourselves, how we treat ourselves. In that case, we're the most vulnerable. And we're harder on ourselves than we are on anyone else. In Ernest Holmes' paper, Words That Heal Today, from 1949, it's only when we view life from the standpoint of an expanding soul, destined to exist forever somewhere, that we can make either sense or sanity out of our human experience. If we view life from the standpoint that each is an evolving, expanding soul, destined to live forever, we shall see that in the long run, life must return to us that which we reflect into it. And that should include caring for ourselves. But do we really want to identify only vulnerable as people? Sometimes dogs are vulnerable. We heard those stories this morning. One of our dog sharers is out saving dogs. Living away from a safe, steady home is an unsafe life. All people deserve to be well treated in their lives. men, women, children, from all classes of life. And this is a universal truth in Buddhism, Hinduism, paganism, and especially our teaching. We learn that all sentient beings deserve protection. So what's a sentient being? Well, you have a sense of that. Homelessness is also a huge issue for animals. As we destroy the ecosystems, the forests, the plains, we're putting a lot of animals into that homeless category. Think of all the coyotes that now live in big urban cities. That's a tough life, getting run over because they don't have protectors to put them back in lot 7. That's just coyotes. Now we have polar bears living in town dumps. Northern Russia, northern Alaska. They have nowhere else to go. They're homeless. Society is failing all these vulnerable beings in many, many ways. And not enough is being done to remedy these situations. If you know anything about today's political climate, you can be sure our politicians, and I don't call them our leaders, our politicians have no solutions. So where does that leave us? I'm just one person. What difference can I make? I can talk about it, hope that my words are heard, and that somebody who hears my words can make a difference. But is that really the best path? One day, on this planet, coming soon to a planet near you, people will be safe to be outside at night. To say a woman shouldn't be allowed to be out at night, that's nonsense. If you have no home to go to, how on earth does a woman stay out of sight? If anyone feels it's the woman's fault for being out, I say, no. 9. Leh. At one point I could say that in 10 languages, but I got old. There are no excuses. Is it a feminist issue? Should anyone who calls himself a feminist sleep easy knowing one more woman has been a victim pretty much every minute in our country at the violence of a man? Gender crime is real. It's discrimination at its worst. Let's be brutally honest about this in a way that you will never see in an outline. For those of us who believe in reincarnation, we believe in the idea, the concept of karma, we sometimes tolerate this cycle. And we go, oh, that's karma. But that's nonsense. There's no excuse for this behavior. We all benefit from karma in our own way. We choose much of what we experience, but we're all free to stop that cycle. Where in the past life I was abused, so in this life I'll be an abuser. We are free to choose another way. I'm a deep believer in the idea that all of us are on a life journey together to live the best possible life we can. Seeing people who are unable to even begin to think that thought saddens me. Having this great blessing of life, living in these United States of America or Ethiopia, means so much is possible to us. But it can so easily be wasted. by our own inaction. We can trash this concept, we can trash each other, we can trash the planet, trash the ecosystems, trash the animals. And when I say animals, I mean the winged animals, the four-legged ones, two-legged ones, shelled, vertebrates, invertebrates, protozoa. 1967, Dr. Holmes published Thoughts Are Things. And he said, we are all bound, tied, hand and foot, by our very freedom. Our free will binds us. But as free will enables us to create the conditions which externally limit us, so it can uncreate or dissolve them. It's not enough to say that we attract what we think. We become what we think. And what we become, we attract. So, who wrote this stuff? What do you mean? Well, doing research for this talk, I found an article that I just want to mention and quote. It's called A Book by Robert E. Goodin, Goodin, in Protecting the Vulnerable. And he talks about theories of responsibility based on vulnerability, talks about the range of vulnerabilities that people in our country have, and whom we've made specific commitments to, and that includes protecting. And that same principle applies in an international circle. Our country has been willing and able to step up and provide safeguards for other countries. And right now, we're not quite as eager to do that. And that's a consciousness thing. I'm not going to blame our political leaders. I'm going to blame our consciousness, our national consciousness. In '68, Dr. Holmes published It's Up to You. One of the greatest stumbling blocks in any man's spiritual advancement is dishonesty. The refusal to honestly face an idea if that idea happens not to please him. This comes in part from the human tendency to take the line of least resistance, whether it be our physical endeavors or in the operation of our minds. Confronted with an idea that repudiates one we have held for years, we go far out of our own way, entirely around the idea, to keep from being forced to analyze our own beliefs. Our cry becomes, I don't want to believe that. Okay? Behind that idea is the fear that we might be forced to examine our own consciousness and uncover our own responsibility. I know each one of us knows some nonprofit that serves an amazing responsibility, protecting vulnerable. In his book, A New Republic of the Heart, that was the book for the month. Did I mention the author?
No.
Thank you, Sharon. Terry Patton, A New Republic of the Heart. He says, and this is really why I included it, we know we are creating a new earth. We've talked about that in Randy and Rana's classes, many other situations, classes. This universe, this planet is evolving, and it's evolving into a new earth. describe it as fifth dimensional and above. There will still be a third dimensional earth, but it will not, the fifth dimension will not tolerate not stepping up, not protecting the vulnerable. It won't even be an issue, because that consciousness won't exist at that fifth dimension. In the book, he calls it the Good Samaritan energy, is simply feeding those who are hungry, sheltering those who are homeless, providing clothing to those who are naked. To do this, we become skilled at being our own Good Samaritans. And he mentions he has a nonprofit called the Kaleidoscope Child Foundation, sponsors scholarships for girls in Guatemala. These girls work from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night making tortillas. 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. You know what they're paid? Nothing. Their families get $50 a month. It might be the only income the family has. So how interested are they in getting their little girls educated to work in other situations? It will cut off their own income. But that's what this nonprofit does. They take these girls out and they get them educated. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. $60 a month. A month. He has a bigger vision of empowerment. We all know the story about the little boy walking the beach, throwing starfish back in the water. And then a man walks up and he goes, you know, you can't save them all. I can save that one. I can save that one. That's what it takes. That consciousness. There's another nonprofit I want to mention because it's one and I'm not even going to say contribute to. I put $50 out online, Kiva, K-I-V-A. They make micro loans and you get to choose to who and for what. I've loaned to 50 people from my original $50. And they pay back $2 or $3 a month. And yet I've helped an immense number of entrepreneurs, business people around the world. I think I've done 12 different countries at this point. I may be up to it that I put another 50 and I'm doing 100. But at any given time, I have loans out to 7, 8 people. And then I get a cha-ching, you got a repayment, $3. 98% of these people repay those loans on time. And they're doing things like buying 2 more goats to sell goat milk.
Chickens.
Buying corn to feed their chickens so they can sell more eggs. Buying cloth so they can make and sell clothing. Kiva, K-I-V-A. And anytime you want, you can take your money out. So you're not even paying it. It's like a bank account where you're the bank. That's one of the ways I like to do it. Empowerment can only be manifested through planting and nurturing seeds of trust. Back to the teaching symbol, second level. That's the garden, that's where you plant seeds. Third level is results. That's empowerment. That's how we empower the vulnerable. Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the forefathers of our teaching, he was a huge influence on Dr. Holmes, us that nature is our greatest teacher. Yeah, well, if that's true, what can we learn from nature about this process? Well, he wrote, nothing divine dies. Nothing. All good is eternally reproductive. The beauty of nature reforms itself in the mind, and not for barren contemplation, but for new creation. Trust in ourselves. Protect our own vulnerability. Then we can go out and begin to empower others. In that book, A New Republic of the Heart, he uses a term I hadn't heard before, epistemic humility. It requires us to know deeply and consistently that however much we do know, what we don't know is just as important and probably more significant. You know the expression, we don't know what we don't know. So, empowerment hinges on honesty. Authentic empowerment rests in our decision to provide commitment, or to commitment, to a life of practice, honesty, curiosity, through our divine birthright. Remember, nothing divine ever dies. That includes us. Through our divine birthright, we have the capacity to co-create with the Creator, our Creator. Last week we did a short visualization exercise. I want to remind you, because you can use that anytime, anywhere, sitting at a stoplight, in an elevator, Sunday mornings when I'm talking, for yourself, for your benefit. And once you get good at it, then you can expand your practice to include others. Just spend a few minutes each day visualizing a wave of spiritual empowerment sweeping over the planet. And we hear from spiritual entities that that's the truth. When we visualize it, we empower it. There is a wave of light. That's why the planet itself is evolving to fifth dimensional consciousness. If you can't visualize it, just pretend, imagine, use your fantasy. That way we can all experience it together. Namaste.
Namaste.